Now we're going to have a panel discussion. We love a panel on GB News, don't we? And I'm joined by former Labour advisor Matthew Laza and political correspondent for The Spectator, James Heal. Hello, chaps.
Good morning.
You recovered?
Just about. Today's the first day of feeling human.
I know. You
Just
were saying you didn't expect on Thursday night to be in what seemed to be a former strip club with Darren Grimes.
It was absolutely with our wonderful viewers,
which we loved,
which were fantastic. But I'm slightly worried that they kept saying, "Oh, you're our favourite lefty, and you're the acceptable face of socialism."
That's great,
so,
though, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So
it was quite a lovely night.
Unacceptable face of socialism.
Exactly. We just don't tell some of the comrades.
No, that's right. And James, where were you on the night? You're watching it from the Spectator office, I guess.
A bit of it, and also a few parties. I went to the Carlton for a bit, so there's
you went to the Carlton to get you, honestly. You're such a blue. Right. Now, let's talk in this first, because I'm going to have two panels with you. We're going to talk about Labour in this one, and then you're going to react to the Suella Braverman interview after we've done it a little bit later in the show. Let's just talk about this vote share issue. I mean, the idea that Starmer is in government with this massive majority, a bigger majority than probably he could have imagined, although less than the pollsters had predicted at one stage, where they were putting the Tories down to sort of like complete Armageddon. But it is weird, isn't it, Matthew, to have him in there on 34% share of the vote. More people voted for the Conservatives and Reform combined than voted for the Labour Party. And there he is with all of these seats.
Yeah, I mean, it is an extraordinary example of the inadequacies of our electoral system, which, of course, Labour talks about when it's in opposition. There's been, inside the party, actually, there's been a big move towards support for fair votes, proportional representation over the last sort of decade. There used to be quite a lot of union opposition to it, and the unions have come round. So the conference does regularly pass motions in favour of changing the voting system.
But they're never going to pass. I mean, the Labour government's quite happy with first past the post now. So are the Lib Dems, by the way. They've changed their
absolutely. They're overrepresented now, proportionately.
Quite.
But the thing is, I mean, Sunday morning, we don't want to get bogged down in different electoral systems. But the one that we voted on for those very few people who did vote in the referendum under the coalition, which is AV, which is when you keep the constituency and you number your choices until somebody gets over 50%. That might rear its head again, because that would, because of course, what you'd have seen this week is quite a lot of seats where Lib Dems and the Greens, because Labour will be conscious of the threat to its left as well as the threat to its right, where those voters would have transferred to Labour, and Labour would have, you keep the seats that you won, where Labour got 31 and the Greens got 11, sort of thing, in lots of those seats in the home counties, which has now got...
Careful what you wish for, because like the Greens, if they got PR, I think would be left with like 40, 50 seats or something, which would be a threat to the Labour Party.
I mean, this is the big story for me of the night, which is actually the sort of death of the old two-party, three-party system. In 1997, the Tories, the Lib Dems, Labour together got more than 90% of the vote. This time they got less than 70% of the vote.
Yeah.
Labour and the Conservatives just got 57% of the vote together. And what we're seeing is these smaller parties, these independents, the Greens as well, really sort of nibbling into Labour's left flank, while there's sort of Reform coming up on the right as well. So I think that's going to be really interesting, these debates around proportional representation. For now, we've kind of got first past the post, which has sort of preserved the two main parties' dominance. But I think if there was any move to an AV system, that might change. And also, of course, Reform got finished second in 94 constituencies. A lot of them in the north of England. There's a whole sort of belt in the north of England where there's, I think, 20 seats next to each other, where the Reform came second, including Yvette Cooper's seat.
I mean, I wrote on Saturday in my column for The Telegraph that, it wasn't guaranteed. This whole idea of 10 years of Labour, when you've only got a 34% vote share, I think is a fallacy. I mean, he may do very well. He may steady the ship. He may be quite centrist. We've got the kind of influence of Blair clearly in the background, which is probably no bad thing if you're a righty, thinking that it's not going to go, fully Corbynista again. But at the same time, it's difficult, isn't it? Because we know who they won't tax, for instance, because they've said that, working people. They haven't said who they will. Rachel Reeves is going to be in a bit of a fiscal straitjacket. I mean, I can't understand this, Matthew. Can you try and explain how are they going to fund their spending pledges if they're not going to put tax up, at least on working people, and she's going to stick to these very strict borrowing rules because they want to look as if they're economically competent? We had the Steve Baker intervention where he was saying after he lost his seat in Wickham, she's going to have to reintroduce austerity. I mean, do you understand that argument? Is there something in that?
Well, there is something in there, because we've seen over the last 24 hours the appointment of these blasts from the past, with Alan Milburn's job to be confirmed on the NHS, Jackie Smith and Douglas Alexander. Of course, they lived through in 97 when Labour did stick to the Tory spending plans in 97. Yeah. So you had this kind of weird 18 months, which was fine. And I'm old enough to remember it was fine in 97 because there was so much kind of joy around the fact that the government wasn't suddenly transforming the health service. service, they got away with it. And then it was only after the 2 years of the Tory spending plans that they started to pour money into the NHS. They did actually, you know, stealth taxes was the phrase of the time. They kept income tax where it was, but they did other taxes, which again we might see over time. So I think actually that's why Keir was emphasising at the press conference yesterday, it takes time to turn public services around, not least because they're not going to have the money to spend on it for those first couple of years. What they will do is the specific promises. VAT on school fees will happen, probably phased in, controversial, but it will happen. The non-DOMs thing, that will fund the specific pledges. But let's face it, the kind of, you know, they were pretty small beer, you know, in terms of the extra appointments available in the NHS and the extra teachers in state schools. If you're going to transform public services, that's going to have to wait to the second half of the term.
James, I mean, what are Spectator readers thinking about all this? Are they very suspicious that actually in a few months' time they're going to find their council tax has gone up, their gardens are being taxed in a kind of Welsh Labour style, it's tax on wealth? I mean, they're just waiting for a bombshell.
Yeah, I think sort of raising a lot of taxes everywhere, sort of small sums that add up to a much bigger sum. I think the interesting thing, of course, is Labour's response the next couple of weeks ahead of that first budget, you know, the plans for that. Are they going to kind of pin it all on the Tories? Are they going to say, actually, we've looked at the books, we need to actually increase taxes higher than we thought on this different areas, more assets, I think that's the assets thing is the real interesting thing. Obviously, they can't really raise income tax when it's at a sort of 75-year high of the income, tax burden overall. But I think there's a lot of sort of scepticism and suspicion. And I just say on the 2019 election, there was the pollster James Canagasorian who came up with the phrase the red wall, which defined that. He's also this time come up with the phrase the sandcastle success. You know, basically Keir Starmer's success is built on a castle of sand.
Yes.
It could easily wash away with these tides.
Yes.
And one of the ways I think that could happen is if the economy doesn't grow like Labour says it will. They keep talking about growth, but growth takes time. And you can kind of see a mid-term blues affecting this Labour Party within sort of 2-3 years' time.
Can we talk about accountability as well? I mean, it's quite interesting that some of the dialogue on the largely left-leaning Twitter and social media is like, oh, well, you know, the right are finished and you've got nothing more to say and all the rest of it. I sort of thought, what are you talking about? It's actually now these sort of left-wing commentators that don't have much more to say because they spent the last 14 years attacking the Tories. It's like, where are you going to pivot to now? I've already seen some quite extraordinary examples of sort of like slavish devotion to the Labour cause from a few commentators. And what's interesting is we don't know why Jonathan Reynolds has pulled out of the interview that he was due to do with us today. We also don't know why Chopper, the political editor, Chris Hope, was not invited to ask a question at the press conference yesterday. I mean, you've got a Prime Minister on one hand who said, well, we are here to represent everyone, including those who didn't vote for us, which I thought, well, that's a good thing because 2/3 of the public didn't, almost. But at the same time, I mean, are we now going to see this mass snubbing of GB News because Labour only want to speak to people that agree with them all the time?
I think it's more cock-up than conspiracy, particularly with yesterday with not calling Chopper. Maybe Johnny didn't feel he wanted to get the Tommy scrutiny this morning, but I'm going to tell him he needs to.
I'm afraid I will hold everyone accountable.
Absolutely,
regardless
quite
of which
right.
party they belong to. That's always been the shtick of this show.
But I think you've got an issue in terms of the sort of Labour internal Labour politics now. For the first time, you've got Labour MPs in seats like Ashford, in Kent, all these home county seats, which have very different take. We'll be more worried about capital gains tax than traditional Labour seats.
James.
I also think that the danger is that Labour and the Labour commentariat think that the Tories are evil and it was all because of the Tories. Good intentions and a few more resources can't solve some of these structural issues, and it's a mistake to think just because you get a Tory government out and put Labour on, automatically things are going to become better overnight. I think that's the single biggest mistake Labour can make going into these things. It'll take some time, but just simply being not the Tories is not going to be enough, and the commentariat around them needs to reflect that.
Also, I think one of the phrases, I mean, we remember Gordon Brown talking about the global financial crisis being a problem for him. I think we're going to hear that phrase, we've inherited a terrible legacy, quite a lot. We can't do what we want to do because of the legacy that we have inherited, and therefore that might be indeed the dialogue.
How many years should they get away with that? That'll be the question.
I don't know, but there's always a slow, it's like long-term economic plan. I mean, you say it often enough, the public start to believe it. We'll have to leave it there, chaps, but you are coming back. So we can cover the Tory side of things in just a moment. So they'll be back.